A glittering charity gala, cameras flashing, champagne flowing, and then a sound that freezes the room. A millionaire strikes his pregnant wife so hard she collapses, and 300 guests capture it all on video. What follows isn't just a scandal, it's an all-out war between power, truth, and the people brave enough to expose him. Two brothers step out of the shadows to defend her, and the fight they start will shake an empire built on lies. But here's the twist: the cameras only caught the beginning. What happened next will leave you speechless. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. Trust me, you won't want to miss how this ends. Let's get into it. The security camera timestamp read 11:47 p.m. In the underground parking garage, fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across concrete pillars. A woman stumbled between parked cars, one hand pressed against her bleeding temple, the other clutching a phone with a cracked screen. Claire Ashford's emerald evening gown was torn at the shoulder. Mascara streaked down her cheeks. At 7 months pregnant, every step sent pain radiating through her swollen belly. She reached her silver sedan and collapsed against the driver's door, gasping for breath. Footsteps echoed behind her. Heavy, deliberate, getting closer. "You tell anyone, and I'll make sure you never see that baby again." The voice was cold, controlled, terrifyingly calm. "Do you understand me, Claire?" She nodded, unable to speak, her vision blurred. The phone slipped from her fingers and clattered to the concrete. The last thing she saw before darkness claimed her was the red recording light still blinking on her screen. Then nothing. The timestamp froze at 11:51 p.m., 72 hours earlier. The Ashford Foundation's annual charity gala sparkled with old money and new ambition. 300 guests filled the waterfront estate overlooking Lake Michigan, their jewelry catching light from crystal chandeliers. A string quartet played Mozart near the marble fountain. Waiters glided between clusters of politicians, surgeons, and corporate executives, offering champagne and carefully crafted conversation. Claire worked the room with practiced grace, one hand resting on her rounded stomach. Her emerald gown had been tailored to perfection, elegant without being ostentatious. She smiled at a hospital board member, laughed at a donor's joke, and mentally calculated how close they were to the $2 million goal. Across the terrace, her husband held court with the mayor and 3 city councilmen. Bradley Ashford commanded attention effortlessly. At 38, he'd built a real estate empire from a single property renovation into a portfolio worth $300 million. His dark suit was custom tailored. His smile revealed perfect teeth. His handshake conveyed confidence without aggression. Everything about Bradley Ashford screamed success. Claire knew better. She'd learned to read the signs. The way his jaw tightened when someone disagreed with him. The precise angle of his head when he was calculating how to manipulate a conversation. The cold flicker in his eyes when he looked at her and saw not a wife, but a possession that had disappointed him. Tonight, that cold flicker had appeared the moment she'd mentioned the baby shower her friend was planning. "Mrs. Ashford, your work with the Children's Hospital is truly inspiring." The voice pulled Claire from her thoughts. She turned to find Rachel Donovan standing beside her, holding 2 champagne flutes. Rachel was Bradley's executive assistant, 28 years old, blonde, ambitious, and wearing a red dress that probably cost more than Claire's monthly grocery budget. She offered one of the glasses with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Just water for me," Claire said, gesturing to her stomach. "But thank you." "Of course. How thoughtless of me." Rachel's laugh was bright and hollow. She set both glasses on a nearby table. "Bradley speaks so highly of your dedication to the cause. You must be exhausted, planning events like this while pregnant." Something in her tone felt wrong. Too familiar. Too knowing. "I enjoy the work," Claire said carefully. "I'm sure you do." Rachel glanced across the terrace where Bradley was now posing for photographs with the mayor. "He's remarkable, isn't he? So passionate about protecting innocence, about family values." The way she said family values made Claire's stomach turn. "Excuse me," Claire murmured. She headed toward the restroom, needing space to breathe, to think. The marble hallway was blessedly quiet after the noise of the party. She pushed open the bathroom door and locked it behind her. Her reflection stared back from the gilded mirror. She looked tired, older than 32. The concealer under her eyes was starting to crack. She'd learned to apply it perfectly over the past 3 years, covering the shadows that came from walking on eggshells in her own home. The door handle rattled. Claire. Bradley's voice was calm, patient, the voice he used when he was most dangerous. Open the door. She unlocked it. He slipped inside and locked it again behind him. Are you feeling unwell? He asked. His eyes scanned her face, cataloging every micro-expression. You left rather abruptly. Just needed a moment. The baby's been kicking. He reached past her to adjust his tie in the mirror. She caught the scent of expensive cologne and something else. Perfume. Not hers. The mayor wants to announce the total raised so far. You'll need to be beside me for the photographs. Of course. His hand moved to her shoulder, fingers tightening just slightly. And Claire, that conversation with Rachel looked intense. What were you two discussing? Nothing important? The event planning? Because Rachel mentioned you seemed upset. His grip increased pressure, not enough to bruise, but enough to send a clear message. I wouldn't want anyone to think there's tension in our perfect marriage. Not tonight, not when so many important people are watching. Claire met his eyes in the mirror. There's no tension. Good. He released her and smiled, the expression transforming his face into a mask of warmth. Let's go make this evening memorable. They returned to the terrace together, Bradley's arm wrapped around her waist in what looked like affection. His fingers dug into her side like talons. The mayor raised his glass. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks to your generous support and the tireless work of Bradley and Claire Ashford, I'm thrilled to announce we've raised $2.3 million for the Children's Hospital. Applause erupted. Cameras flashed. Bradley beamed and pulled Claire closer for the photographs. She smiled until her face ached. As the crowd dispersed, Claire caught Rachel watching them from across the terrace. The younger woman raised her champagne glass in a small, private toast. The gesture felt like a declaration of war. Claire's water broke 2 hours later. Not really, but that's what she would tell the police later, explaining why she'd interrupted Bradley's conversation with his biggest investors, why she'd grabbed his arm and said, too loudly, "We need to go to the hospital, now." The truth was simpler and more complicated. She'd seen Rachel's lipstick on Bradley's collar when he'd emerged from his study, seen the way Rachel had slipped out 30 seconds later, adjusting her dress. Claire had spent 3 years swallowing her pride, her anger, her self-respect. But standing there, 7 months pregnant with his child, watching him schmooze with men who'd write 6-figure checks while his mistress smirked from across the terrace. Something inside her finally cracked. "Bradley," she said, interrupting a discussion about municipal zoning laws. "We need to talk. Right now." Every man in the circle turned to look at her. Bradley's smile didn't waver, but his eyes went flat and cold. "Darling, I'm in the middle of an important conversation." "I don't care." The investors shifted uncomfortably. One cleared his throat. Another suddenly needed to refill his drink. Bradley's hand closed around her wrist. To anyone watching, it looked like a husband steadying his pregnant wife. Claire felt bones grinding together. "You're not feeling well, Mom," he said smoothly. "Let me help you to a chair. I'm feeling perfectly clear." She tried to pull away. His grip tightened until black spots danced in her vision. "Let go of me. Claire." His voice dropped to a whisper only she could hear. "Smile, or I will make you regret this for the rest of your life." She yanked her arm back hard. The champagne glass in her other hand flew from her grip, arcing through the air in what felt like slow motion. It shattered against the marble floor with a sound like a gunshot. Every conversation on the terrace stopped. 300 people turned to stare. Bradley's face remained calm. His hand rose in what looked like a gesture of concern. The slap came so fast that Claire didn't see it. She only felt the explosion of pain across her left cheek, the sudden loss of balance, the sickening moment of free fall before your temple struck the corner of the buffet table. Blood, warm and wet, trickling into her eye. Gasps. A woman screamed. Phone cameras rose like a field of fireflies. Everyone recording. Everyone watching. No one moving to help. Claire's hand went to her stomach. The baby kicked once, hard, as if to say, "I'm still here. Mom, keep fighting." She looked up at Bradley. He stared down at her with an expression she'd never seen before. Not anger, not fear, just cold calculation, already planning his next move. "Someone call an ambulance," he said. his voice perfectly steady. My wife slipped on the spilled champagne. She's hurt. The ambulance siren cut through the night air like a scream. Claire lay on the stretcher, an oxygen mask over her face, watching lights blur past the window. The paramedic pressed gauze against her temple while monitoring her vitals. Ma'am, can you tell me what happened? His voice was young, concerned. The name badge read Tyler Brennan. Claire stared at him. Tyler, her younger brother. She hadn't seen him in 6 months. Not since Bradley had started screening her calls. He'd grown a beard, cut his hair short, but those were still the same green eyes that used to make her laugh when they were kids. Tyler. Her voice came out cracked and small. Recognition flashed across his face. Claire, Jesus Christ, Claire, what happened to your face? I fell. Bullshit. He glanced toward the front of the ambulance where his partner was driving, then back to her. His hands were gentle as he examined the cut on her temple, but his jaw was tight with barely controlled rage. Did he do this? She couldn't answer. Admitting it out loud would make it real. Tyler's radio crackled. ETA 3 minutes to Mercy General. Patient stable. Possible concussion. Pregnant at 7 months. Send OB to meet us. The hospital was chaos controlled by routine. Nurses moved with efficient purpose. Machines beeped steady rhythms. Someone was crying in the next bay. The air smelled like disinfectant and fear. Dr. Robert Matthews, the attending physician, examined Claire with practiced hands. He was in his 50s, gray at the temples, with eyes that had seen too much to be surprised by anything. Mrs. Ashford, I'm going to be direct. This injury didn't come from a fall. The angle is wrong. He shone a penlight in her eyes. What really happened tonight? I told the paramedic I slipped. Your brother is very worried about you. Tyler needs to mind his own business. Dr. Matthews set down his penlight and pulled up a stool. I've been an ER doctor for 28 years. I know what domestic violence looks like. I also know that women in your situation often feel trapped, afraid, unable to ask for help. But I need you to understand something very important. Your baby's health is directly connected to yours. The stress alone can cause complications. And if you're injured again, I won't be. You can't know that. The curtain rustled. Detective Owen Marshall stepped into the bay, a tablet tucked under his arm. He was in his early 40s, with the weathered look of someone who'd spent too many years staring at humanity's worst impulses. Mrs. Ashford, I'm Detective Marshall. I'd like to ask you a few questions about what happened at the gala tonight. Claire's heart hammered against her ribs. Am I under arrest? No, ma'am, I'm investigating an assault. I already told everyone. I fell. Marshall pulled up another stool and sat down, bringing himself to her eye level. Mrs. Ashford, 17 people recorded video of the incident on their phones. I've reviewed the footage. It's very clear what happened. He turned the tablet toward her. The screen showed the terrace from multiple angles, all time-stamped. In each one, Bradley's hand was clearly visible as it struck her face. Claire felt something inside her chest crack open. It's never been like this before. He gets angry, but he's never hit me where people could see. The admission hung in the air. Tyler appeared in the doorway. His face was white. Marcus is here. Marcus Brennan looked like he'd aged a decade since Claire had last seen him. Her older brother was 35 but could pass for 45. The war had carved lines into his face that had nothing to do with time. He'd come straight from a construction site, still wearing dusty jeans and a flannel shirt. He saw Claire on the hospital bed and stopped moving entirely. Just stood there, staring at the bruise blooming across her cheek. Marcus, she whispered. He crossed the space between them in 3 strides and gathered her into his arms, careful of her pregnant belly, careful of her injuries, but holding on like he might lose her if he let go. I'm sorry, Claire said. I'm so sorry, but for what? For being hurt, for surviving. His voice was rough. Don't you dare apologize for what he did. Detective Marshall cleared his throat. Mr. Brennan, I need to finish taking your sister's statement. Marcus released Claire but stayed close. She has nothing to say without a lawyer present. I'm not interrogating her. I'm trying to help. The system doesn't help women like Claire. It fails them, over and over again, until they're dead. Marshall's expression shifted. You're right, the system often fails. But I'm asking you to give us a chance to get it right this time. We have video evidence, we have witnesses, we have probable cause for arrest. If your sister is willing to press charges, we can take Bradley Ashford into custody tonight. Claire looked between the three men in her life, her brothers, who'd always protected her when they could, the detective, who seemed sincere but represented an institution that had disappointed her before. And somewhere beyond these walls, Bradley was probably already talking to his lawyer, already constructing his narrative. What happens if I say yes, she asked. We arrest him on assault charges. He goes before a judge for arraignment, probably tomorrow morning. Bail will be set. Given his resources, he'll likely post it, so he'll be free by tomorrow afternoon. Yes, but there will be a restraining order. He won't be allowed to contact you or come near you. Tyler spoke up. A piece of paper doesn't stop a bullet. No, Marshall admitted, but it's a start, and it creates a legal record. Right now, tonight, you have the power to make a choice that could save your life and your baby's life. Will you press charges against your husband? Claire thought about the lipstick on his collar, the years of casual cruelty, the way he'd looked at her on the terrace, like she was an inconvenience to be managed. The cold promise in his voice in the parking garage. You tell anyone, and I'll make sure you never see that baby again. She placed both hands on her stomach, feeling her daughter move beneath her palms. This baby deserved better than to be born into a house built on fear. Yes, Claire said. I'll press charges. Detective Marshall nodded once. I'll need you to sign a formal statement, and I'm going to recommend the judge issue an emergency protective order tonight. 2 hours later, Bradley Ashford was arrested at his penthouse downtown. The booking photo would later surface online, showing him in a designer suit, jaw clenched, eyes burning with cold fury. Claire didn't see it. She was being discharged from the hospital with strict instructions to rest, to avoid stress, to follow up with her obstetrician in the morning. Tyler drove her to Marcus's apartment in silence. It was a modest place, barely furnished, with the careful emptiness of someone who didn't want to get attached to material things. Marcus made up the couch with clean sheets while Tyler brewed decaf coffee. You can stay here as long as you need, Marcus said. We'll figure out the rest tomorrow. Claire lay down, exhaustion pulling at her like an undertow. Through the thin walls, she could hear her brothers talking in low voices in the kitchen. He's going to come after her, Tyler said. I know. The restraining order won't stop him. I know that too. So what do we do? A long pause. Then Marcus's voice, harder than she'd ever heard it. We protect her, whatever it takes. Claire closed her eyes and felt tears slide down her temples. For the first time in 3 years, she wasn't alone in her fear. For the first time, she'd told the truth out loud, but she also knew, deep in her bones, that this was only the beginning. Bradley didn't lose. He didn't accept defeat. He would come for her with everything he had, and when he did, the real nightmare would begin. The courthouse smelled like old wood and recycled air. Claire sat in the third row of benches, flanked by her brothers. She'd chosen her clothes carefully that morning, a simple navy dress, minimal makeup, her hair pulled back in a bun. She wanted to look responsible, truthful, and most importantly, not like the hysterical hormonal woman Bradley's lawyer would try to paint her as. Across the aisle, Bradley sat with Nathan Cross, the most expensive defense attorney in Illinois. Cross was 45, silver-haired, and known for getting wealthy clients acquitted of everything from fraud to manslaughter. He wore a suit that probably cost more than Marcus's truck. Bradley had changed since the arrest. He looked thinner, more haggard, with dark circles under his eyes. The perfect mask had slipped, but when he glanced back at Claire, his expression was pure calculation. All rise, the Honorable Judge Helena Reeves presiding. Everyone stood. Judge Reeves swept into the courtroom, her black robe billowing. She was 55, with steel gray hair and a reputation for being tough but fair. What Claire didn't know was that Reeves had accepted $300,000 in campaign contributions from the Ashford Family Foundation during her last election. Be seated. We're here for the arraignment and bail hearing of Bradley James Ashford, charged with aggravated assault and domestic battery. Mr. Cross, how does your client plead? Nathan Cross stood smoothly. Not guilty, Your Honor, and we're requesting immediate release on recognizance. Mr. Ashford is a prominent businessman with deep ties to this community. He's not a flight risk. The prosecutor, a tired-looking woman named Margaret Foster, stood sure. Your Honor, the state opposes release. Mr. Ashford assaulted his pregnant wife in front of 300 witnesses. We have multiple video recordings showing the attack. The victim has credible fear for her safety. Your Honor, Cross interrupted. If I may, the videos show my client attempting to steady his wife after she had an emotional outburst. Mrs. Ashford has been under significant stress due to her pregnancy. Several witnesses can testify that she was acting erratically that evening. Claire's hands clenched in her lap. Tyler put a steadying hand on her shoulder. Judge Reeves looked at the file before her. I've reviewed the preliminary evidence. The videos are concerning, but I'm also seeing statements from character witnesses vouching for Mr. Ashford. The court needs to balance public safety against the defendant's rights. She paused. Bail is set at $500,000. The defendant is ordered to have no contact with the victim and must maintain a distance of at least 100 yards. Margaret Foster looked like she wanted to argue, but the judge's gavel had already fallen. Bradley posted bail within an hour. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Claire tried to push through the crowd, but microphones thrust into her face. Mrs. Ashford, did you provoke your husband? Are you seeking a divorce? Is the baby really his? Marcus shoved through, creating a path. Get back, all of you, get back. They made it to Tyler's car and peeled away from the curb. Claire watched the courthouse shrink in the side mirror. He's free, she whispered. Less than 24 hours, and he's already free. The restraining order still stands, Tyler said, but his voice lacked conviction. That paper doesn't mean anything to him. Marcus turned around from the front seat. Then we make sure you're never alone. One of us is with you at all times. That night, Claire couldn't sleep. She lay on Marcus's couch, staring at the ceiling, feeling her daughter kick. Around 2 in the morning, her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She should have ignored it. She picked it up anyway. The text read, You made a mistake, Claire Baum, but I'm willing to forgive you. Drop the charges and we can fix this. Keep fighting me and you'll lose everything, including her. Claire's hands shook. She showed the text to Marcus. He's violating the restraining order by contacting you. Marcus said, Forward that to Detective Marshall. She did. Marshall responded within minutes. Document everything. We're building a case. But Claire knew the truth. They weren't building a case fast enough. Bradley was out there, free, plotting his next move, and she was running out of time. The smear campaign started 48 hours later. Claire's phone exploded with notifications. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all showing the same fabricated stories. Someone had created fake psychiatric records claiming she'd been diagnosed with borderline personality disorder. Photos of her holding wine glasses at events from years ago were captioned, drinking while pregnant. An ex-boyfriend she'd dated in college gave an interview saying she'd been emotionally unstable and manipulative. None of it was true. All of it was believable enough to create doubt. The hashtag What's the Real Story started trending. Claire watched her life dismantle in real time. Friends stopped calling. Her sister sent a cautious text. Are you okay? These things people are saying. Even her obstetrician's office seemed colder when she went in for her appointment. This is what he does, she told her brothers. He destroys anyone who threatens him. Tyler was furious. We can prove these are lies. By the time we prove it, the damage is done. People remember the accusation, not the retraction. Marcus had been quiet, staring at his laptop. There's more, he said finally. Bradley's team filed a countersuit, $10 million for defamation and emotional distress. They're claiming you fabricated the abuse to gain sympathy and get a bigger divorce settlement. Claire felt the room tilt. I don't want his money, I just want to be safe. I know, but he's making this about money because that's language the system understands. Marcus looked at her with something like desperation. Claire, you need a better lawyer. The public defender they assigned can't fight this. I can't afford a better lawyer. I'll take a second mortgage on the house. You'll lose everything. Better than losing you. That night, Claire stood at the window of Marcus's apartment, watching rain streak down the glass. Somewhere out there, Bradley was sitting in his penthouse, drinking expensive scotch, confident in his inevitable victory. She placed a hand on her stomach. "I'm sorry," she whispered to her daughter. "I'm so sorry for bringing you into this mess." The baby kicked back, hard, as if to say, "Don't you dare give up." But Claire could feel herself breaking. The system she'd trusted to protect her had granted bail to her abuser. Public opinion was turning against her. Her savings were almost gone. And Bradley had an army of lawyers preparing to destroy her in court. How do you fight a man who owns everything? Including the truth. Emma Gallagher had been Bradley Ashford's housekeeper for 2 years. She was 26, putting herself through nursing school, and desperately needed the $15 an hour Bradley paid her under the table. She'd seen things in that penthouse, heard things, photographed things on her phone, just in case. Now she sat across from Detective Marshall in a coffee shop, hands wrapped around a cup she wasn't drinking. "I should have said something sooner," Emma whispered. "But he made me sign papers. Legal papers saying I'd never talk about anything I saw in his house. He paid me $50,000 to keep quiet." Marshall leaned forward. "Emma, I need you to understand something. An NDA can't legally prevent you from reporting a crime. You're protected. You don't know what he's capable of. His last wife—" She stopped herself. "His last wife, what?" Emma pulled out her phone with shaking hands. "Victoria Ashford. They were married for 5 years before Claire. Everyone thinks she just left him, moved away, wanted privacy. But I found hospital records in his office when I was cleaning. Victoria didn't leave. She's in a psychiatric facility, committed involuntarily." Marshall went very still. "Do you have proof? Photos of the documents and more?" She swiped through her phone. "This is from 18 months ago. Claire had a black eye. Bradley told everyone she walked into a door. This is 3 months ago. Bruises on her arms. This is 6 weeks ago. She was crying in the bathroom. I recorded the audio through the door. He was screaming at her, calling her worthless, saying he'd take the baby and make sure she never saw it again. Each image, each audio file, was another nail in Bradley's carefully constructed coffin. Why come forward now?" Marshall asked gently. Emma's eyes filled with tears. "Because I have 2 daughters. They're 3 and 5. And yesterday, my oldest asked me why the pretty lady on TV looked so sad." She was talking about Claire. "And I realized if I don't speak up, I'm teaching my girls that powerful men can hurt women and nobody will stop them." Marshall reached across the table. "Emma, this is incredibly brave, but I need you to know what you're signing up for. Bradley will come after you with everything he has. His lawyers will try to discredit you. Your life will be examined under a microscope. I know, but I can't stay silent anymore." 2 days later, Emma gave her formal deposition, 16 pages of testimony, dozens of photos, hours of audio recordings. It was damning, thorough, and exactly what the prosecution needed to prove a pattern of abuse. Claire met Emma once, briefly, in the prosecutor's office. The 2 women looked at each other across a scarred wooden table. "Why?" Claire asked. "You don't even know me." "Because you're not the first. And if he gets away with this, you won't be the West." Emma's voice was steady now, strengthened by purpose. "I've seen what he's capable of. Someone has to stop him." They didn't hug, didn't exchange phone numbers. But in that moment, Claire felt something she hadn't felt in months: hope. That night, she told her brothers, "We have a real chance now." Emma's testimony changes everything. Marcus wanted to believe her, but he'd learned not to trust the system. "Don't count on anything until it's over." "You sound like you think we'll lose." "I sound like someone who's watched good people get crushed by bad people with money." He softened his tone. "But I hope you're right." The next morning, Emma Gallagher didn't show up for her deposition follow-up. Her phone went straight to voicemail. Detective Marshall drove to her apartment and found the door ajar. The interior ransacked. Drawers pulled out, papers scattered, electronics missing. Emma's sister called the police 3 hours later. Emma was in an ICU in Nevada, 2 states away. She'd been in a single car accident on a desert highway. Her brake lines had been cut. The investigating officer ruled it suspicious, but couldn't prove foul play. Emma's lawyer released a statement. "Ms. Gallagher wishes to recant her previous testimony. She exaggerated and fabricated details for financial gain. She apologizes for wasting the court's time. Claire was in Marcus's kitchen when Detective Marshall delivered the news in person. She listened in silence, watching her hope crumble like sand through her fingers. Someone got to her, Marshall said. His frustration was palpable. Either threatened her or paid her or both. Without her testimony, we don't have a pattern. It's back to being your word against his. But the photos can be explained away as old injuries from other sources. The audio can be argued as taken out of context. Emma was our keystone witness. Without her, the case gets significantly weaker. Tyler slammed his fist on the counter. So that's it, he gets away with it. I didn't say that, but I need you all to understand the reality. Bradley Ashford has resources we don't. He can pay for things we can't prove. He can make witnesses disappear. He can manipulate the narrative. Marshall looked at Claire. I'm not giving up, but you need to prepare yourself for the possibility that the criminal case might not go the way we hoped. After Marshall left, Claire sat at the kitchen table, staring at nothing. Tyler tried to comfort her. Marcus paced like a caged animal. There has to be something we can do, Tyler said. Like what? We're out of moves. We still have the truth. The truth doesn't matter if nobody believes it. Claire finally spoke, her voice hollow. He's going to win. He's going to take my baby and paint me as an unfit mother. And there's nothing I can do to stop him. Marcus stopped pacing. Claire, don't tell me to stay strong or keep fighting. I'm tired. Marcus, I'm so tired. She looked up at her brothers with empty eyes. Maybe I should just give him what he wants. Drop the charges. Agree to whatever custody arrangement he demands. At least then, I'd get to see my daughter sometimes. You don't mean that, don't I? What's the alternative? Keep fighting until I lose everything. Keep dragging you two into my mess, Tyler. You could lose your medical license for being involved in this. Marcus, you've already taken a second mortgage. How much more are you supposed to sacrifice for a fight we can't win? The silence that followed was suffocating. Finally, Tyler said quietly, you taught me something when we were kids. Remember when Dad left and Mom fell apart? You were 16. You held our family together. You told me that giving up was easy, but surviving took courage. You said we were Brennans, and Brennans don't quit. Claire's eyes filled with tears. I was a kid. I didn't know anything. You knew enough to save us. Now let us save you. Marcus knelt beside her chair. We're not giving up, Claire, and neither are you. Not yet. But later that night, alone in the dark, Claire pulled a bottle of pills from her purse. Sleeping medication the doctor had prescribed for anxiety. She counted them out on the coffee table. 23 little white tablets, enough to make everything stop hurting. She thought about her daughter, growing inside her, thought about the life this baby would have, torn between two homes, used as a weapon in her parents' war, thought about the years of court battles ahead, the custody fights, the supervised visitations, the constant fear. Maybe the kindest thing would be to end it now, before her daughter had to live in that world. Claire picked up the first pill. The apartment door opened. Tyler stood in the doorway, still in his paramedic uniform, coming off a late shift. He saw the pills, saw her face, crossed the room in 2 strides and knocked the bottle from her hand. No, he said fiercely. Don't you fucking dare. Tyler, I see this every shift. People who give up. People who think death is easier than living. And you know what? They're wrong. It's not easier. It's just permanent. His voice cracked. You don't get to quit. Claire, you don't get to leave me and Marcus and that baby who's counting on you to fight for her. Claire collapsed into his arms, sobbing. All the fear and exhaustion and despair poured out of her in great, wrenching gasps. Tyler held her until the storm passed. Then he gathered up every pill, flushed them down the toilet, and sat with her until dawn broke through the windows. We'll find another way, he promised. I don't know how yet, but we will. Claire wanted to believe him, but belief required hope, and hope had become the most dangerous thing she could allow herself to feel. Marcus Brennan had killed 11 people during his 2 tours in Iraq, none of them in situations the military would later investigate. He'd been good at his job, efficient and cold when he needed to be, The Army had trained him to identify threats, plan operations, and execute missions without mercy or hesitation. He'd hoped to leave that version of himself in the desert. Now, sitting in his truck outside Bradley Ashford's downtown office building, Marcus felt that cold efficiency settling back into his bones like muscle memory. Tyler sat in the passenger seat, uncomfortable. "We're not actually going to hurt him, right? Because I took an oath to save La Somme. We're going to hurt his credibility," Marcus said. "There's a difference, sir. Is there, because the look on your face right now is the same one you had in your service photos?" Marcus ignored that. He'd been watching Bradley's routine for a week. The man was predictable, arrived at the office at 7, left at 6, stopped at the gym 3 times a week. Most importantly, he met with his lawyer every Thursday at the same downtown restaurant. "The system failed Claire," Marcus said. "So we're done playing by the system's rules. What exactly are you proposing?" "Bradley stays free because he controls the narrative. He has money, lawyers, connections, but he's also arrogant. He thinks he's untouchable. That's his weakness." "I'm not following." Marcus pulled out a burner phone. "We can't trust the police. Judge Reeves is in his pocket. The media will twist anything we say. But we can document the truth ourselves and make sure it goes viral before his lawyers can suppress it." "How?" "By making him confess on camera." Tyler stared at his brother. "You want to catfish him into admitting he hurt Claire?" "Not him, her." Marcus showed Tyler a profile on his phone, a fake social media account for an investment journalist researching successful entrepreneurs. Young, attractive, professional. Rachel Donovan is Bradley's weak point. She's ambitious, bitter that he hasn't left Claire yet. And if we're patient, she'll talk. That's entrapment. Entrapment is when law enforcement tricks someone. We're civilians documenting a story. Completely legal. Tyler rubbed his face. "This feels wrong. So does watching our sister consider suicide. Pick your poison." Over the next 2 weeks, Tyler played his role. He messaged Rachel Donovan through the fake profile, asked thoughtful questions about her career, complimented her insights on real estate markets. He was patient, friendly, never pushy. Rachel responded. She was lonely in the way people in affairs often are eager for attention from someone who didn't judge her choices. 3 weeks in, Tyler asked if she'd be interested in being interviewed for an article about women in male-dominated industries. Rachel agreed to meet for coffee. She showed up overdressed and nervous. Tyler's fake persona put her at ease, asking softball questions about her background, her goals. Then, carefully, he steered the conversation toward Bradley. "Your boss has been in the news lately. Must be stressful." Rachel's smile turned brittle. "Bradley's going through a difficult time. The assault charges. That situation is complicated. His wife is very unstable." Tyler set his phone on the table, screen up, as if casually checking for messages. The voice recorder app was running. "Do you think the charges have merit?" he asked. Rachel leaned it in, voice dropping. "Between us, Claire is manipulative. She knew exactly what she was doing when she caused that scene at the gala. She wanted attention, wanted to make Bradley look bad. So you don't think he hit her?" "Oh, he hit her, but she provoked him. And honestly," Rachel laughed, sharp and ugly, "she's not the first wife he's hit. Victoria was the same way. Dramatic, unstable. That's why she ended up institutionalized." Tyler kept his expression neutral, but his hand clenched under the table. "Victoria Ashford, I thought she just left. That's what everyone thinks. Bradley's good at managing his image. But Victoria started threatening to go public about their marriage. So he had her committed, paid off the right doctors, filed the right paperwork. She's been in a psychiatric facility in Montana for 3 years. That seems extreme." Rachel shrugged. "Bradley doesn't do anything halfway. When he decides to handle a problem, he handles it completely. That's why he's so successful." "Is Claire going to end up the same way?" "Probably, Zion. Once the baby's born, he'll petition for sole custody on grounds of mental instability. Between his lawyers and his connections, he'll get it. Then Claire can either shut up and disappear, or he'll have her committed too." Tyler's stomach turned. "And you're okay with that?" "It's not my business, but her voice wavered slightly. Bradley promised me that once this is settled, we'll get married. We've already picked out names for when we have children together. Tyler let the silence stretch, giving Rachel space to hear her own words. She fidgeted with her coffee cup. You're not going to use any of this, right? This was all off the record. Of course, Tyler lied smoothly. Background information only. He walked away with 43 minutes of recorded audio in which Bradley Ashford's mistress casually described conspiracy to commit fraud, witness intimidation, and plans to institutionalize Claire against her will. Marcus was less subtle. While Tyler worked the social engineering angle, Marcus handled the physical evidence. Bradley's lake house was 60 miles outside the city, surrounded by woods, visited only on weekends. The security system was sophisticated but not designed to stop someone with military training. Marcus broke in on a Tuesday night, wearing gloves, using tools that left no marks. He planted 4 microcameras in the study, bedroom, and living room. High definition, motion activated, streaming to a cloud server that couldn't be traced back to him. Then he waited. Bradley visited the lake house that Friday, bringing Nathan Cross with him. The cameras captured everything. The 2 men sat in the study, drinking bourbon, speaking freely because they believed they were alone and safe. Emma Gallagher won't be a problem anymore, Nathan said. She's terrified and discredited. Even if she tries to testify again, her credibility is destroyed. Good. What about Claire's brothers? Marcus Brennan is the dangerous one. He has PTSD, history of violence. I'm working on getting ammunition to have him arrested on weapons charges. We plant evidence in his apartment, anonymous tip to police. He's gone for 3 to 5 years minimum. Bradley swirled his bourbon. And Tyler, cleaner, but he's vulnerable through his medical license. Any hint of professional misconduct, he loses his job. I'm looking into fabricating a malpractice claim. Do it. I want both of them neutralized before the custody hearing. And what about Claire herself? Bradley smiled. And even through the camera feed, Marcus felt his blood run cold. Claire's about to have a breakdown, Bradley said. In front of witnesses. Violent, unstable, danger to herself and others. I've already arranged for a psychiatric evaluation by Dr. William Hayes. He owes me several favors. After her breakdown, he'll recommend involuntary commitment for her own safety and the baby's. Once she's institutionalized, I file for emergency custody. The baby is born. I get sole guardianship, and Claire spends the rest of her life in a facility where no one will ever believe a word she says. Nathan raised his glass. To family values. They clinked glasses and drank. Marcus watched the feed from his truck, recording every word, barely breathing. He had them. He had everything they needed. The question is what to do with it. If he took the evidence to Detective Marshall, Bradley's lawyers would get it suppressed as illegally obtained. Fruit of the poisonous tree, the case would collapse, and Bradley would know someone had breached his security. He'd accelerate his plans, move against Claire before they could stop him. But if Marcus released the footage, publicly sent it to every news outlet, posted it to social media, made it go viral before Bradley could contain it, the court of public opinion would convict him before any judge could rule on admissibility. It would be illegal. It would probably cost Marcus his freedom, but it would save Claire's life. He drove back to his apartment, where Tyler was waiting with the audio from Rachel. Did you get it? Tyler asked. Marcus played the video. They watched in silence as Bradley laid out his entire plan to destroy their sister. When it did, Tyler said quietly, we can't let him get away with this. We won't. If we release this, we're breaking a dozen laws. We could go to prison. I know. Marcus, I have a career, a life. I know that too. Well, Tyler was quiet for a long moment. Then he pulled out his phone and opened his social media app. How do we make sure it reaches the most people? Marcus looked at his little brother and felt something like pride cut through the cold calculation. We send it everywhere simultaneously. News outlets, social media, direct messages to journalists. We flood the zone before his lawyers can react. Once it's out there, it can't be suppressed. Tonight, before he can move against Claire, they spent 3 hours preparing. Marcus edited the footage, cutting it down to the most damning clips. Tyler wrote a summary, laying out the timeline of abuse and manipulation. They created anonymous accounts, built distribution lists, timed everything to go live simultaneously. At 11 p.m., they pressed send. The files uploaded to YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. They sent links to the Tribune, the Sun-Times, national news networks, investigative journalists who covered corruption and abuse. Within 20 minutes, the first shares started appearing. Within an hour, hashtag Ashford Confession was trending nationally. By midnight, every major news outlet was covering it. Marcus sat back and watched the world wake up to Bradley Ashford's true nature. His phone buzzed constantly with notifications. The video views climbed into the hundreds of thousands, then millions. Tyler looked sick. We just ended his life. No, we just stopped him from ending Claire's. But Marcus knew what this would cost them. The evidence was illegally obtained. They'd broken into private property, recorded conversations without consent, potentially violated a dozen federal statutes. Bradley would survive this. Men like him always found a way, but he'd be damaged, weakened, vulnerable. And in that vulnerability, Claire might finally have a chance at justice. Or they'd all go down together in flames. Marcus honestly didn't know which outcome was more likely. He just knew they'd run out of legal options. And sometimes the only choice left was to break the rules that were designed to protect predators. He called Claire. Turn on the news. Marcus, what did you do? What we had to watch. On every channel, the same footage played Bradley Ashford, drink in hand, casually planning to institutionalize his wife and frame her brothers. Claire's voice was barely a whisper. Oh my God. It's over, Marcus said. He can't hide anymore. But even as he said it, he wondered if he was right, or if they'd just started a war they couldn't possibly win. The video hit 10 million views by sunrise. Bradley Ashford woke to find his face plastered across every news network. His voice played on loop. His private conversation dissected by legal analysts and social media commentators. His phone was dead. Not from lack of battery, but because his team had taken it away, desperate to prevent him from doing more damage. Nathan Cross sat across from him in the penthouse, looking like he'd aged 10 years overnight. We have a serious problem. Fix it. Bradley's voice was flat. I can't fix this. The recording is everywhere. I've filed takedown notices. But for every copy we suppress, 50 more appear. Twitter won't suspend the accounts sharing it because they're claiming public interest. YouTube is citing journalistic freedom. We're losing the narrative battle. Then we change the narrative. How they have you on tape planning to institutionalize your wife and frame her brothers. Bradley stood and walked to the window. The city spread below him, indifferent to his crisis. The recording is illegal. It was obtained without my consent on my private property. It's inadmissible in court. You're right, but this isn't about court anymore. The FBI opened an investigation this morning. Judicial corruption, conspiracy to commit fraud, witness tampering. Judge Reeves is being questioned about her campaign contributions from your foundation. The district attorney is reviewing every case you've been involved in for the past 5 years. Bradley's reflection in the window looked haunted. What about the custody case? Postponed indefinitely. No judge will touch it while you're under federal investigation. And honestly, Nathan set down his briefcase. I need to tell you that I'm withdrawing as your counsel. Bradley turned slowly. You're abandoning me. I'm protecting my license. What you discussed in that recording implicates me in criminal conspiracy. If I continue representing you, I'm opening myself to prosecution. I'm sorry. Bradley, you need to find new representation. After Nathan left, Bradley sat alone in his penthouse, watching his empire crumble on live television. The Tribune ran a front-page story, real estate mogul's dark secret abuse, manipulation, corruption. The mayor issued a statement distancing himself from the Ashford Foundation. The hospital board of directors called an emergency meeting to discuss removing Bradley's name from the children's wing. His company's stock dropped 32% in morning trading. And everywhere, on every platform, people shared the video with comments like, "This is what abusers sound like when they think no one's listening." Rachel Donovan was at her apartment when Detective Marshall knocked on her door. She'd spent the night crying, deleting social media accounts, trying to disappear from the internet. Ms. Donovan, I need you to come to the station and answer some questions. I don't have to talk to you. You're right, But I should inform you that the state's attorney is reviewing charges for conspiracy and accessory to witness tampering. Cooperating now might be the difference between probation and prison time. Rachel grabbed her coat. At the station, Marshall played her own recorded words back to her, the audio Tyler had captured, where she'd casually described Bradley's plans to institutionalize Claire. I was just talking, Rachel said weakly. I didn't know anything for sure. You said, and I quote, Bradley's good at managing his image. He had Victoria committed. You described specific plans to obtain custody through fraud. That's conspiracy. Miss Donovan. I want a lawyer. Smart choice. But the damage was done. Rachel's words, combined with the video of Bradley, painted a picture of systematic abuse and cover-up that prosecutors could actually use, unlike the illegally recorded video. Rachel's statements to Tyler weren't protected by expectation of privacy. She'd spoken freely in a public coffee shop. Believing she was talking to a journalist, the law was on the prosecution's side for once. Meanwhile, Claire sat in Marcus's apartment, watching her life vindicated in real time. Her phone exploded with messages from people who doubted her, now apologizing. Friends who'd believed Bradley's smear campaign now offered support. Strangers sent words of encouragement. But Claire felt numb. Is this real? She asked her brothers. Or will he find a way to spin this too? Tyler turned off the TV. The FBI doesn't open investigations because of spin. He's done. Maybe. But even if he goes to prison, he's already taken 3 years of my life. He's made me afraid of my own shadow. How do I get that back? Marcus sat beside her. You can't unburn the bridge, but you can build a new one on the other side. Claire placed a hand on her stomach. The baby was due in 6 weeks. What kind of world am I bringing her into? One where her mother fought back and won. That night, the doorbell rang. Detective Marshall stood in the hallway, looking almost relieved. Mrs. Ashford, I wanted to tell you in person, the state is filing expanded charges against your husband. Assault, conspiracy, witness tampering, judicial corruption. The evidence is overwhelming. He's going to prison. Claire felt tears slide down her face. Not from joy, but from exhaustion. How long? 15 to 25 years, if convicted on all counts. And he will be convicted. We have video, audio, financial records, Rachel Donovan's cooperation. It's the strongest case I've ever worked. What about the recording? Bradley's lawyers will say it's inadmissible. They're right. We can't use it in court. But we don't need to. The recording exposed the conspiracy, which led us to legal evidence we can use. Rachel's testimony is admissible. Emma Gallagher, now that she knows Bradley's finished, has agreed to testify again. We have subpoenaed the psychiatric facility where Victoria Ashford is held. Everything is unraveling for him. After Marshall left, Claire felt something she hadn't felt in years safe. Not completely, not permanently, but in that moment, sitting between her brothers, carrying her daughter, knowing Bradley would face consequences for his actions, she felt the weight lift just enough to breathe. Thank you, she whispered. Marcus shook his head. Don't thank us for doing what should have been done 3 years ago. You broke the law for me. We exposed the truth. Sometimes that requires breaking rules that protect predators. Tyler pulled up his phone. Speaking of which, my medical board wants to interview me about ethical violations. Apparently catfishing someone is frowned upon in my profession. Will you lose your license? Maybe. Probably. But I'd do it again. Claire looked at both of her brothers, these men who'd sacrificed their own safety to protect hers, and realized something important. She'd never been as alone as Bradley had made her feel. The system had failed her. But people hadn't. Her brothers had fought when the law wouldn't. Emma had spoken up when silence would have been easier. Even Detective Marshall had worked within his constraints to help however he could. Justice wasn't perfect. It was messy and slow, and often required people to break themselves open to make it happen. But it was possible. And for the first time in 3 years, Claire believed she deserved it. 8 months later, snow fell outside the federal courthouse. Claire sat in the front row of the gallery, her daughter Grace asleep in a carrier against her chest. The baby was 3 months old, healthy and perfect, with her mother's eyes and her father's dark hair. Bradley Ashford sat at the defense table, looking gaunt. 8 months of house arrest and media scrutiny had carved away his polished facade. His new lawyer was competent but overwhelmed. The evidence against Bradley was mountainous. All rise, the Honorable Judge Patricia Winters, presiding. Judge Winters was 70, stern, and untouchable. She'd been assigned to the case specifically because she had no connections to the Ashford family or their foundation. Her reputation for fairness was legendary. Members of the jury, we're here to hear closing arguments in the case of United States versus Bradley James Ashford. Counsel, you may proceed. The federal prosecutor, Richard Sullivan, stood. He'd spent months building this case, and his preparation showed. Ladies and gentlemen, this trial has been about power, specifically about what happens when someone with power uses it to hurt others who can't fight back. Bradley Ashford systematically abused his wife for years. When she finally tried to escape, he used his money, his connections, and his influence to destroy her credibility, intimidate witnesses, and corrupt the judicial system itself. Sullivan walked the jury through the evidence, photos of Claire's injuries, medical records, Emma Gallagher's testimony about previous incidents, financial documents showing bribes paid to Judge Reeves, Rachel Donovan's detailed account of Bradley's plans to institutionalize Claire. The defense wants you to believe this was a private marital dispute that got out of hand, but the evidence shows a calculated pattern of abuse and manipulation. Bradley Ashford thought he was above the law. Your verdict will prove him wrong. The defense attorney did his best, arguing that Claire had exaggerated the abuse, that the financial improprieties were accounting errors, that Rachel was a bitter ex-lover with an axe to grind. But no one in the courtroom believed him, not after months of testimony, not after seeing video of Claire collapsing on the terrace, not after hearing Emma describe finding Claire unconscious in the bathroom with Bradley standing over her. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. Claire spent that time in the courthouse cafeteria, feeding Grace, trying not to hope too hard. Marcus and Tyler sat with her, silent support. Whatever happens, Claire said, I want you both to know you gave me my life back. The jury's going to convict, Tyler said. They have to. Juries are unpredictable. Wealthy white men have a way of avoiding consequences. Marcus's phone buzzed. They're coming back. The courtroom filled quickly. Reporters, victims' advocates, curious observers who'd followed the trial online. Claire held Grace tighter as the jury filed in. Judge Winters looked at the foreman. Has the jury reached a verdict? We have, Your Honor. On the count of aggravated assault, how do you find guilty? Bradley's face went white. On the count of conspiracy to commit fraud, guilty. On the count of witness tampering, guilty. On the count of judicial bribery, guilty. The foreman continued through all 17 counts. Guilty, guilty, guilty. Bradley sat frozen, his carefully constructed world disintegrating with each word. Judge Winters set sentencing for 2 weeks later. Bradley was remanded to custody immediately. Marshals approached the defense table. For the first time, Bradley looked back at Claire. She met his eyes steadily. Holding their daughter, she didn't smile, didn't gloat, just looked at him with something like pity. He'd had everything, if dear home, and he'd destroyed it all because he couldn't let go of control. The marshals led him away in handcuffs. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Claire made a brief statement, reading from notes Tyler had helped her prepare. Today, justice was served. But I want to be clear, this verdict doesn't undo the years of abuse. It doesn't erase the fear. What it does is send a message that power and money can't protect you from the consequences of your actions. To anyone living in an abusive situation, you are not alone. There are people who will believe you. There are systems that can help. Please reach out. Please survive. Please know that you deserve better. She didn't take questions, just walked away, surrounded by her brothers, carrying her daughter toward a future that finally felt possible. Sentencing day arrived with gray skies and cold wind. The courtroom was packed again. Victims' advocates filled 2 rows. Claire sat front and center, Grace in her carrier, now big enough to smile at strangers. Judge Winters reviewed the pre-sentencing report in silence. Then she looked at Bradley. Mr. Ashford, you had every advantage in life. Wealth, education, opportunity. You used those advantages not to help others, but to harm them. You systematically abused your wife. You corrupted our judicial system. You intimidated witnesses. You attempted to have an innocent woman institutionalized so you could steal her child. I've presided over criminal trials for 40 years, and I have rarely seen such calculated cruelty. Bradley stood, his lawyer beside him. Your Honor, if I may address the court, you may not. You had months to show remorse. You showed none. Instead, you continued to claim victimhood, to blame your wife for your actions. Even now, you show no understanding of the harm you've caused. She opened the sentencing guidelines. On the federal charges, the recommended sentence is 12 to 15 years. However, given the aggravating factors, the abuse of power, the corruption of public officials, the endangerment of an unborn child, I'm imposing the maximum sentence, 22 years in federal prison, followed by 3 years supervised release. You will serve at least 85% before being eligible for parole. A collective gasp went through the courtroom. 22 years. Bradley would be 60 years old before he tasted freedom again. Additionally, Judge Winters continued, I'm issuing a permanent restraining order. You are to have no contact with Claire Ashford or her daughter. No letters, no phone calls, no third-party messages. If you violate this order, I will add contempt charges. Do you understand? Bradley's voice was barely audible. Yes, Your Honor. The marshals led him away. This time, he didn't look back. Claire felt tears slide down her face. Not from sadness, but from a release of pressure she'd been carrying for so long, she'd forgotten what it felt like to breathe normally. Tyler hugged her. Marcus rested a hand on Grace's head. It's over, he said softly. It's really over. That night, Claire stood at the window of her new apartment, a modest place. Nothing like the penthouse she'd shared with Bradley, but hers in a way that mattered. Grace slept in the nursery. Her brothers had gone home after helping her celebrate with takeout pizza and sparkling cider. She looked out at the city lights and thought about the woman she'd been 3 years ago. Young, naive, believing love could change a broken man. She'd paid for that belief with blood and fear, and years of her life she'd never get back. But she'd also learned something crucial: she was stronger than her fear. The system had failed her at first, but when people with courage stepped up, her brothers, Emma, Detective Marshall, even strangers on the internet who'd shared her story, the system had eventually worked. Imperfectly, slowly, at great cost. But it had worked. Claire pulled out her phone and opened her email. 3 organizations dedicated to helping domestic violence survivors had reached out, asking if she'd be willing to speak publicly about her experience. 6 months ago, the thought would have terrified her. Now, looking at her sleeping daughter, thinking about all the women still trapped in situations like hers, Claire felt something surprising: hope. Not hope that the world was perfect, but hope that maybe, by sharing her story, she could help one person find the courage to escape, to fight, to survive. She typed a response, yes, I'm ready to help. Then she closed her laptop, checked on Grace one more time, and went to sleep in a bed where she felt safe. For the first time in years, she didn't dream of Bradley's hands around her throat. She dreamed of Grace growing up strong and fearless, never knowing the weight of a man's violence. And when she woke in the morning, the sun was shining, and her daughter was smiling, and the future felt like something she could actually reach out and touch. Justice hadn't healed everything, but it had given her space to start healing herself. And sometimes that was enough. The community center smelled like coffee and fresh paint. Claire stood backstage, listening to the murmur of voices in the auditorium. 300 people had come to hear her speak tonight: survivors, advocates, law enforcement, social workers. The turnout was larger than expected. Grace was with Marcus tonight, probably eating too much ice cream and staying up past her bedtime. At 3 years old, she was confident, curious, and completely unafraid of the world. She didn't remember the man in prison who shared her DNA. She called Marcus Uncle Trouble and Tyler Uncle Silly. She knew her daddy was away. That was enough for now. The difficult conversations would come later. Mrs. Ashford, you're on in 2 minutes. The volunteer coordinator smiled nervously. There's quite a crowd out there. I know, I'm ready. Claire walked onto the stage. The lights were bright. The faces in the audience varied, some hopeful, some skeptical, some carrying the particular exhaustion that comes from fighting battles that seem unwinnable. She adjusted the microphone and began without preamble. 3 years ago, my husband beat me unconscious at a charity gala in front of 300 people. It took 18 months for him to face consequences. Tonight, I want to talk about why the system failed, how it eventually worked, and what we can do better. For the next 45 minutes, Claire told her story. Not just the dramatic moments, the slap, the trial, the verdict, but the grinding, awful middle, the bail hearing that freed her abuser, the smear campaign that made people doubt her sanity, the witness who recanted after being terrorized, the moment she'd considered ending her own life because survival seemed impossible. "I'm not telling you this for sympathy, Meba," she said. "I'm telling you because someone in this room right now is living through something similar. And I need you to hear this. The system is not designed to protect you quickly. It's designed to protect the accused's rights, which often means your safety comes second. That's not fair. That's not right, but it's reality. So we have to be strategic." She outlined the lessons she'd learned. Document everything. Photos, recordings, journals. Build a network of support before you need it. Understand that leaving is often the most dangerous moment. Know that legal protection is imperfect, but still worth pursuing. And here's the hardest truth. Sometimes the system won't save you in time. Sometimes you need people willing to break rules to expose the truth. My brothers did that for me. They risked their freedom to save my life. Tyler lost his medical license for 6 months pending ethics review. Marcus still faces occasional scrutiny for his methods. But I'm alive because they refused to let the system's limitations become my death sentence. The audience was silent, rapt. I'm not advocating for vigilante justice. I'm saying that when institutions fail, ordinary people have to step up. Be the person who believes the victim. Be the person who documents evidence. Be the person who refuses to look away. That's how we change the culture that enables abuse. She paused, taking a breath. I founded Safe Harbor Legal Aid because I needed a place that didn't exist when I was fighting for my life. We provide free legal support, safety planning, and advocacy for domestic violence survivors. We work within the system, but we also push back when the system fails. We're not perfect, but we're here. After her speech, Claire stood in the lobby answering questions. A woman in her 40s approached, eyes red from crying. "Thank you," she said. "I've been trying to leave for 2 years. My husband is a police officer. Nobody believes me when I say he hurts me. But hearing you tonight, I think I can do this." Claire gave her a business card for Safe Harbor. "Call tomorrow. We'll help you make a plan." The woman nodded and disappeared into the crowd. Marcus appeared with Grace on his shoulders. The little girl's face was sticky with what looked like chocolate. "Uncle Trouble let me have dessert before dinner," Grace announced proudly. "Of course he did." Claire lifted her daughter down and wiped her face. "What do we say about sugar before vegetables?" "It's awesome," Marcus grinned head. Tyler joined them, shaking his head. "You're a terrible influence," Tyler told his brother. "She's 3, that's what uncles are for." They walked to the parking lot together, Grace chattering about the movie they'd watched. Claire felt contentment settle over her like a warm blanket. This was her life now, meaningful work. Family that loved her. A daughter who'd never know fear as a daily companion. But later that night, after Grace was asleep and the apartment was quiet, Claire's phone buzzed with a notification. An email from the Federal Bureau of Prisons. "Inmate Bradley Ashford has requested to be added to your approved correspondence list." Claire stared at the screen for a long moment. Bradley was 3 years into his sentence. 19 more to go. He tried to contact her twice before, both times denied because of the restraining order. But technically, she could choose to allow communication. He couldn't force it. But if she consented, letters would be permitted. Claire thought about the woman from tonight who was still trapped in her abuser's orbit. Thought about all the survivors who never got justice. Thought about the version of herself who'd been so broken she'd considered swallowing pills. Then she clicked Deny Request and blocked the sender. Some doors, once closed, should stay closed. She had spent 3 years rebuilding herself. She'd learned to sleep without nightmares. She'd learned to let Grace play at the park and without scanning for threats. She'd learned to believe she deserved happiness. Opening communication with Bradley would undo all of that, would give him power over her mental space, would signal that he still had access to her, even from prison. No. She was done giving him anything, even acknowledgement. Claire deleted the email and opened her photos instead. Pictures of Grace's third birthday party. The team at Safe Harbor celebrating their 100th successful case. Marcus teaching Grace to play catch. Tyler making ridiculous faces that had everyone laughing. This was her life now, full of ordinary bond and hard-won peace. Bradley was a chapter in her past, an important one. Yes, it had shaped her, taught her, ultimately made her who she was today. But it was over. She was the author of her own story now, and the next chapters would be written on her terms. Claire set down her phone and went to check on Grace one last time before bed. Her daughter slept peacefully, one hand curled under her chin, the other clutching a stuffed elephant. "Your mama fought for this," Claire whispered. "For you to sleep safe, for you to grow up without fear. I hope you never have to fight the way I did. But if you do, I hope you remember you come from survivors. You're stronger than you know." She kissed Grace's forehead and returned to her own room. Tomorrow, she'd meet with 3 new clients at Safe Harbor. She'd have lunch with her brothers. She'd pick Grace up from preschool and listen to stories about finger painting and playground adventures. Ordinary days were no longer something to endure. They were gifts she'd fought hard to earn. And every morning she woke up free. She won again. Tyler Brennan sat across from the medical licensing board, 3 stern-faced administrators reviewing his case file. He'd been preparing for this meeting for 18 months, ever since the ethics complaint was filed. "Dr. Brennan," the chair began, "we've reviewed your conduct regarding the Ashford case. You created a false identity, misrepresented yourself as a journalist, and recorded a conversation under false pretenses. These actions violated multiple ethical standards for medical professionals." Tyler kept his expression neutral. "I understand. Do you dispute any of the findings?" "No. I did exactly what the complaint alleges." The 3 board members exchanged glances. "You're not denying it." "No, and I'm not denying it. And I'm not apologizing for it either." Tyler leaned forward. "My sister was being systematically destroyed by an abuser who'd corrupted the legal system. The evidence I obtained led directly to his conviction and prevented him from institutionalizing an innocent woman. I'd do it again." The chair frowned. "Medical ethics aren't situational. Dr. Brennan, you can't claim the ends justify the means." "Can I? Because the alternative was letting my sister or be locked away while her abuser went free. So yes, I broke your rules, but I saved a life. Which matters more to you?" The room went silent. Finally, the chair spoke. "The board recognizes the extraordinary circumstances of your case. We also recognize the significant public good that resulted from your actions. However, we cannot simply ignore ethical violations." She paused. "Your medical license is suspended for 6 months, effective immediately. You'll be required to complete ethics training and appear before this board again at the end of that period. At that time, we'll determine whether full reinstatement is appropriate." Tyler nodded. "Thank you." Outside the hearing room, Marcus was waiting. "How bad?" he asked. 6 months suspension. Could have been permanent revocation. That's your career. Tyler, your income? It's 6 months. I'll survive." Tyler managed to smile. "Besides, Safe Harbor needs a volunteer coordinator. Claire offered me the position if this went south." Marcus studied his brother. "You don't regret it." "Regret saving Claire, never. Regret the method. Sometimes, late at night, I wonder if there was a legal way we missed. But then I remember the look on her face when she was holding those pills. And I know we didn't have time for legal methods." They walked to Marcus's truck in silence. "You ever hear back from the DA about the breaking and entering?" Tyler asked. "No charges filed. Technically, the evidence was illegally obtained. But since it wasn't used directly in court, and since it led to legitimate evidence, they gave me a pass." Marcus climbed into the driver's seat. "But I'm on a list now. I can feel it. Cops watch me differently, like they're waiting for me to step wrong." "Is that paranoia or PTSD talking?" "Probably both." Marcus started the engine. "The therapist Claire found me says I have unresolved trauma from Iraq that got triggered by the Ashford situation. Apparently breaking into people's houses and conducting surveillance reminds my brain of special operations, which reminds my brain of people trying to kill me." "Are the sessions helping?" "I don't wake up at 3 a.m. checking windows anymore. So yeah, they're helping." They drove through the city, past the building where Bradley's company used to have its headquarters. New management had taken over, rebranded, tried to distance themselves from their founder's crimes, but everyone still called it the Ashford Building, the name sticky with scandal. "You think he's suffering in prison?" Tyler asked. "I hope so. But guys like Bradley usually find a way to make prison work for them, probably running card games or leveraging his business knowledge. Sociopaths adapt. Think he'll come after Claire when he gets out." Marcus's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "He'll be 71 years old if he serves his full sentence. But yeah, I think he'll try. Men like that don't let go. They can't. That's why I'm making sure Claire knows how to protect herself long term. You taught her to shoot, and to recognize surveillance, and to vary her routine, and to trust her instincts when something feels wrong." Marcus glanced at his brother. "She thinks I'm being paranoid, but I saw what he's capable of. I'm not taking chances." They pulled up outside Safe Harbor's office. Claire had chosen a building in a diverse neighborhood, accessible by public transit, with childcare available on site. The waiting room was full women of all ages, some with children, all carrying the particular exhaustion of people who'd been fighting for their survival. Claire was in her office, reviewing a case file. She looked up when her brothers entered. "How'd the hearing go?" she asked Tyler. 6 months suspension." She winced. "I'm sorry." "Don't be. You warned me about the ethical implications. I made the choice." He sat down. "So about that volunteer coordinator position, it's yours, 15 hours a week, unpaid for now, but once the grant comes through, we can talk salary." "Deal." Claire turned to Marcus. "And you stop lurking. Either come work for us or go back to construction. But you can't keep showing up and silently installing security systems we didn't ask for. Your back door had a weak lock." "Marcus, fine, but I'm still teaching your staff self-defense basics." "That I'll accept." Grace ran into the office, chased by one of the childcare workers. "Mommy, Uncle Silly is here." Tyler scooped her up. "Who wants ice cream before dinner?" "Me," Grace shrieked. Claire raised an eyebrow. "You two are determined to rot her teeth before kindergarten." "It's our job as uncles." Tyler carried Grace toward the door. "Come on, Munchkin. Let's go scandalize your mother with poor nutritional choices." After they left, Marcus lingered. "You doing okay, Asina?" he asked Claire. "Most days, yes. Some days I still have nightmares. Some days I see a man in a suit and my heart races. But I'm healing, slowly. You're also changing the world. 23 women housed safely in the last quarter. 17 custody cases won. That's not nothing. It's not enough. There are thousands of women still trapped. You can't save everyone." "I can try." Marcus smiled. "That's the sister I remember, the one who never accepted that some things were impossible." After he left, Claire sat alone in her office, listening to the sounds of the building, phones ringing, quiet conversations, a child laughing in the playroom. She thought about the cost of getting here, Tyler's suspended license, Marcus's ongoing PTSD, her own scars, visible and invisible, the years she'd lost to fear. But she also thought about the woman from last night's speech, the one who'd decided to finally leave, about the families Safe Harbor had helped reunite, about Grace, growing up strong and safe. Justice had cost all of them something. That was the truth nobody talked about. Fighting back always had a price, but the alternative, silence, submission, slow death of the spirit, cost more. Claire opened her laptop and started drafting a grant proposal. If they could secure funding, they could open a second location, hire more lawyers, help more families. The fight wasn't over. It would never really be over. There would always be another abuser, another victim, another case where the system failed and ordinary people had to step up. But every person they helped was a victory. Every woman who escaped was proof that courage mattered. Claire had learned something crucial over the past 3 years. You don't have to win every battle to win the war. You just have to keep fighting, one day at a time, one case at a time, one survivor at a time. And sometimes that was enough to change the world. 5 years after Bradley's conviction, Claire received an unexpected letter. Not from prison, she'd blocked all communication from Bradley, but from Victoria Ashford. The envelope arrived at Safe Harbor's office, forwarded through 3 different addresses. Victoria's handwriting shaky but determined. Dear Claire, you don't know me, but we share something terrible and transformative. I was Bradley's wife before you. I'm writing from Mountain Ridge Psychiatric Facility in Montana, where I've been held against my will for 8 years. I want you to know I'm finally getting out. After Bradley's conviction, my family hired lawyers to review my commitment. Turns out, the doctors who signed off on my involuntary admission were paid by Bradley. The whole thing was fraudulent. I'm being released next month. I'm writing because I need you to understand something. What happened to us wasn't our fault. Bradley is a predator. He identifies women who are compassionate, who believe in fixing broken things, who have just enough self-doubt to be manipulated. He's exceptional at finding our fractures and widening them until we forget we were ever whole. You got out. You fought back. You saved yourself and your daughter. I spent 8 years in a facility, convinced I was crazy, convinced I deserved it. The only reason I'm free is because you exposed him. Your courage saved my life, even though we've never met. Thank you. Thank you for being stronger than I was. Thank you for fighting when it would have been easier to give up. Thank you for making sure he can never do this to anyone else. I hope you're healing. I hope you're happy. I hope your daughter grows up never knowing the fear we lived with gratitude and solidarity. Victoria Claire read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down her face. Tyler found her in her office, clutching the pages. What happened? He asked, alarmed. She handed him the letter. He read it in silence, his expression shifting from confusion to understanding to quiet fury. 8 years, he said finally. He kept her locked up for 8 years. And she thinks she was weaker than me. That's what breaks my heart. She thinks there's a hierarchy of victims, when the truth is we both survived a monster. Claire wiped her eyes. I'm going to visit her. Claire, she needs to know she's not alone. 6 weeks later, Claire drove to Montana. Grace stayed with her uncles for the weekend. The facility was tucked into the mountains, beautiful and isolated, the kind of place that looked like a healing retreat, but functioned as a prison for people whose families wanted them hidden. Victoria Ashford was 43 but looked 60. Prison of any kind ages you. But psychiatric facilities have their own particular toll. She was thin, medicated, wearing donated clothes that didn't quite fit. They met in the visitors' lounge, 2 women connected by trauma and survival. You came, Victoria said, almost disbelieving. Of course I came. They talked for 3 hours. Victoria described her marriage to Bradley, the same patterns of control and manipulation, the same escalation from emotional to physical abuse, the same moment when she'd tried to leave and he'd had her committed instead. The doctors said I had delusions, Victoria explained. Said I was paranoid, making false accusations, a danger to myself. Bradley visited once a week, playing the concerned husband. Everyone believed him. Why wouldn't they? He's charming, wealthy, respectable. And I was the crazy wife who'd had a breakdown. You weren't crazy. You were escaping. I know that now. But for 8 years, I believed them. I took the medication. I attended the therapy sessions where they tried to convince me my memories were false. I almost started believing it. Victoria's hands shook. If you hadn't exposed him, I'd still be here. I'd die here. Claire reached across the table and took Victoria's hand. You survived. That's what matters. You survived. And now you're getting out. And you get to build a new life. I don't know how to build a life anymore. I'm 43. I've been institutionalized for 8 years. I have no job, no savings, no recent work history. Where do I even start? You start with Safe Harbor. We have connections to job training programs, housing assistance, therapy specifically for abuse survivors. You start by letting other people help you the way people help me. Victoria's eyes filled with tears. Why are you being so kind? You don't owe me anything. Yes, I do. We're the same, different timelines, same story. And if I can help you rebuild, that means something. He tried to destroy is actually stronger than he ever was. They exchanged contact information. Claire promised to connect Victoria with resources. Victoria promised to testify if any of Bradley's appeals went forward, to make sure the parole board knew exactly what kind of man was requesting early release. Driving home, Claire thought about the long shadow Bradley had cast over multiple lives. 2 wives institutionalized or nearly so. How many other women had there been that she didn't know about? How many had stayed silent, convinced they were alone? Grace was waiting when Claire got home, launching herself into her mother's arms. "Mommy, we made cookies and Uncle Marcus let me stay up late, and we watched the space movie." Claire held her daughter tight, breathing in the scent of baby shampoo and chocolate chips. This was what Bradley had tried to take from her, this ordinary, perfect moment of being someone's whole world. "Did you have fun with your uncles?" "So much fun, but I missed you." "I missed you too, baby." That night, after Grace was asleep, Claire sat at her desk and wrote a letter of her own. Not to Bradley, she'd never give him that power, but to the parole board that would eventually review his case. To whom it may concern. My name is Claire Ashford. I am the survivor of a violent assault by Bradley James Ashford that resulted in his conviction and incarceration. I am writing to ensure that when his parole hearing occurs, you have complete information about the danger he continues to represent. Bradley Ashford is a calculating predator. His abuse was not impulsive or born of anger management issues. It was systematic, strategic, and designed to isolate and control his victims. He has shown no genuine remorse, only regret at being caught. I have rebuilt my life in the 5 years since his conviction. I run a nonprofit helping other survivors. I'm raising my daughter in safety. I've learned to sleep without nightmares. But I know that if Bradley is released early, he will find a way to punish me for testifying against him. Men like him never let go of perceived betrayals. I am not asking you to be swayed by emotion. I'm asking you to look at the facts: 2 wives abused, one nearly institutionalized, one successfully institutionalized for 8 years, multiple witnesses intimidated, a pattern of corruption and manipulation that extends far beyond the charges he was convicted on. When the time comes for his parole hearing, I will appear in person to testify. But I wanted this letter in his file now, so there's no question about the ongoing risk he represents. Bradley Ashford should serve every day of his sentence, not as punishment, but as protection for any woman he might target next. Respectfully, Claire Ashford. She printed the letter, signed it, and mailed it the next morning. Then she went to work, met with 4 new clients, helped a woman file a restraining order, and picked Grace up from preschool. The work of healing was never finished. Neither was the work of protecting others still trapped in situations she'd escaped. But she'd learned something crucial, like you can't let the abuser occupy space in your head rent-free. You take precautions, you stay vigilant, you prepare for the worst, but you also live your life. You let yourself be happy. You refuse to let fear steal more years than he already took. That evening, Marcus and Tyler came over for dinner. They'd made it a tradition: Sunday dinners. Just the 4 of them. No discussion of cases or legal battles, just family. Grace insisted on showing everyone her latest artwork, a chaotic explosion of finger paint that might have been a horse or possibly a spaceship. "It's beautiful," Tyler said seriously. "I especially like the green parts." "That's the grass. The horse eats grass." "Definitely a horse then." They ate spaghetti and laughed at Grace's stories from preschool. They didn't talk about Bradley, or the trial, or the costs they'd all paid to get here. They just existed together, broken and healing and stubbornly optimistic that tomorrow might be better than today. Later, after her brothers left and Grace was asleep, Claire stood at her window looking out at the city. Somewhere out there, Victoria was preparing to rejoin a world that had moved on without her. Somewhere out there, another woman was making the terrifying choice to leave her abuser. Somewhere out there, a daughter was learning that her mother's strength could be her inheritance. And somewhere in a federal prison, Bradley Ashford was living with the consequences of his choices. Claire didn't feel triumphant. She felt tired and grateful and cautiously hopeful. She'd fought for her life and won. Not perfectly, not without scars, but she'd won. And every day she woke up free. Every day she helped another survivor. Every day Grace grew up confident and unafraid. Those were victories that mattered more than any court verdict. Claire closed the curtains, checked the locks one final time, and went to bed. Tomorrow, she'd wake up and fight again. But tonight she'd rest. She'd earned it. If you or someone you know is experiencing domestic violence, please reach out. You are not alone. National Domestic Violence Hotline, 1-800-799-7233. Text START to 8878. www.thehotline.org. Help is available 24/7. You deserve safety. You deserve support. You deserve to survive.